I'm Marissa Cole, 36, and the night my brother said I just used your card for snacks, the kitchen clock clicked loud enough to drown out my breath, the kind of sound you notice when something inside you goes very still. He stretched across my living room sofa like it was his shoes on the edge, scrolling his phone, and I smiled, because that's what I do when I feel the floor shift under me. I took my laptop to the bedroom and opened my banking app, and the numbers on the screen didn't make sense. Not at first, then they did, and my throat went dry as dust. $12,000 gone as neatly as if someone had swept it into a bag. My phone buzzed with a call from my father telling me not to make a fuss, and suddenly the house didn't feel like home. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and tap that like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand your ground when family pushed you past your limit. I was born on the quiet side of town, the side where porches creak in summer and folks stretch a dollar with the same care. They stretch a story, my mother used to say. Kindness starts at the sink. So we washed our own plates and everybody else's. When life got messy, I learned early that bills don't wait and pride doesn't pay them, which is how I became the kind of accountant who keeps ledgers straight for people who run their shops with hope and a jar of paper clips. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and it kept a roof over my boy's head when the world didn't feel steady. Willow Ridge sits close to a lake that turns pewter in October and bright silver in July. And our street is full of teachers, mechanics, nurses, the kind of people who trade garden tomatoes over the fence and check each other's mail when someone's out of town. My townhouse is small, the mortgage tight, but it's ours. Hand-me-down dining table, thrifted lamps, the walls covered with Liam's sketches, and the spelling bee ribbon he pretends not to care about. And most nights I finish client work at the kitchen counter while he builds code puzzles on an old laptop and tells me about the stars he wants to see through a real telescope one day. Travis blew in 8 months ago with a duffel bag and a grin that had gotten him forgiven more times than it had earned him a day's work. He called it crashing for a few weeks while he figured things out, and I said yes, because that's what big sisters do when there's no one else, and they remember the way a house sounds when it's too quiet. He took the guest room, and his laughter filled the halls for a while. Then his shoes filled the doorway, his jacket, the banister, and his promises filled the space where progress should have been. I kept ironing his shirts for interviews that never happened, and moving Liam's projects from the dining table to the coffee table to the corner, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself I was helping, telling myself that family is supposed to catch each other when they fall. Walter, our father, loves the word responsibility, and he has a way of saying it like a blessing that lands heavy. He thinks Travis just needs a good break and the right kind of patience. He thinks I'm strong enough to carry the difference until it arrives. And sometimes I've believed him, because the stories we grew up on were stitched with duty and second chances, and because it's easier to be strong than to explain why you're tired of being strong. The truth is, our lives run on different clocks, mine set by school drop-offs and client deadlines, grocery lists and coupons, his by late mornings, and plans that sound big over takeout containers and wilt. By Monday, the contrast felt harmless until it didn't. Until Liam stopped inviting friends because the house was crowded and loud, until I counted my pennies twice and still came up short, until the word later became its own kind of bill. I couldn't afford that. Tuesday began, like most others, coffee gone cold, emails blinking a boy's backpack by the door, and it ended with my hands motionless over a keyboard, while a balance I'd nursed back to health fell flat on its face with the click of a lock. I suddenly didn't trust, and the soft thud of my heart trying to choose between peace and appeasement. I wish I could say the shock passed quickly, that I shut the laptop and slept like nothing had shifted, but the mind keeps circling what it can't make right all night. I heard the lake and the refrigerator and the faint rise and fall of my brother's snore, and I thought about the small things we give up without noticing the corner of a table. A weekend plan, a little boy's confidence. I thought about the way a kind person becomes a convenient person, and how the difference shows up in red numbers by morning. The sky over Willow Ridge had turned lavender and quiet. And I poured coffee. I didn't taste, pressed the phone to my ear, and listened to my father say, I should let it go because he's family. I looked at the closed door of the guest room and the open bills on the counter, and for the first time in a long time, the word family did not sound like a promise. It sounded like a line I might have to redraw. When I glanced back at the screen, the total hadn't changed, and neither had the choices in front of me, somewhere between the clock and the coffee pot, between what I was taught and what my life needed. Something in me steadied. Not loud, just firm. I closed the bedroom window against the morning chill, set my cup down, and reached for the steps I had avoided taking, knowing full well that once I took the first one, there would be no going back, and knowing too that the next voice I would hear would try to talk me out of it. The next morning began quietly, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate, like the house itself was holding its breath. The pale light from the lake reached across the kitchen floor as I sat staring at my laptop. My checking account was a wall of red numbers, $12,000 gone, line by line, a digital graveyard of my hard work. I scrolled through each transaction, the list growing longer with every click. Expensive headphones, concert tickets, a luxury watch, a gaming laptop, even flights to Miami. None of it was mine. My coffee had gone cold before I realized my hands were shaking. I called the bank, trying to keep my voice even. The woman on the other end spoke in a calm, distant tone, as if she'd seen this happen 100 times before. She confirmed the charges had been made using my card information saved to an account under the name Travis Cole. Hearing it out loud made my stomach twist. He hadn't even bothered to hide it. I had let him order pizza months ago using my card, and apparently that was all he'd needed. "We can file a dispute and flag the account for fraud," she said. The word fraud landed hard. I thanked her, hung up, and sat still listening to the house creak around me. I thought of Liam asleep upstairs, his room half claimed by Travis's clutter. His soccer shoes were still missing. I'd found one of them under the guest bed last week. I'd promised him we'd replace the laptop he used for coding class, but that money, his money for his future, was now sitting in someone else's shopping cart. The air grew thick with the kind of anger that doesn't roar. It just settles deep, quiet, and cold. My father's words from the night before echoed in my head. "Don't make a big deal. He's your brother." I used to believe that meant something. Now it just sounded like permission to be hurt again. 8 months earlier, when Travis had shown up at my door with that duffel bag and a shaky smile, I hadn't hesitated. He'd lost his job at a car dealership, he said, and needed a place to stay until he got back on his feet. I remember the wind that night, how it howled across the porch while I stood there debating between reason and loyalty. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders slumped, eyes full of a charm that had always managed to erase his mistakes. I told him he could stay for a few weeks. At first it was fine. He helped around the house a little, made breakfast on weekends, joked with Liam about old movies. I almost believed we could make it work. But soon the job hunt turned into long naps, and the afternoons stretched into evenings filled with video games and takeout boxes. The laundry piled up, and my kitchen felt smaller by the day. I remember one Sunday when Liam came home from soccer practice holding his uniform in a plastic bag. He said he didn't want to invite friends over anymore because the house felt crowded. He didn't complain, not really, but I could see it. The quiet way he stopped asking if we could go to the park after dinner, the way he slipped into his corner of the couch when Travis took over the dining table with his laptop and snacks. My father called every other week, always asking the same thing. "How's your brother doing? You keeping him motivated?" His voice carried a mix of pride and expectation, like I was supposed to be proud of the extra weight I carried. I'd tell him Travis was looking, that he was trying. And maybe part of me still believed it, but the signs were there. Travis never came home empty-handed, new shoes takeout from places I'd never afford, little gadgets he claimed he found on sale. He always had a reason, always a story, always that easy grin that melted my questions before they could form. When I brought up bills or rent, he'd joke, "You're the accountant, sis, you'll figure it out." I had figured it out, but only by working late into the night, taking on extra clients, cutting back on groceries, and delaying the upgrades Liam needed for his classes. I told myself it was temporary, that Travis would pay me back when things got better. But deep down, I think I already knew he wouldn't. That morning, sitting at my desk, I finally saw it for what it was. Not just the money, but the pattern, the slow erosion of boundaries that started long before the card charges. The weekend visits where he'd forget his wallet, the calls asking for a little help until Friday, the way our father's praise always landed on him, even when he hadn't done a thing to earn it. I opened my email and saw a string of purchase confirmations, all linked to his address and email. He hadn't even tried to hide them. Each subject line was like a nail sealing the truth in place. He knew I'd see it eventually. He just didn't care. The more I read, the heavier it became. Every luxury item represented something I'd sacrificed: Liam's school supplies, our summer trip plans, the savings I'd guarded for emergencies. I realized that this wasn't just about losing money. It was about losing the trust I'd been defending for years. I thought about calling my father again, maybe to make him understand. But what would I say? That his favorite son had robbed me, that his advice had cost me nearly everything I'd worked for. I already knew what he'd say. He's family, Marissa. Family helps each other. The words rang hollow now. I opened a new tab and started filling out the fraud report. The questions felt invasive. Had I given him permission? Had I shared my card information? Had I ever suspected misuse? My answers lined up like confessions. Yes, I should have. My hand steadied with each click, the fear slowly replaced by focus. By the time I submitted the form, something inside me had shifted. Later that afternoon, I heard Travis in the kitchen laughing on the phone with someone. His voice was full of confidence, the same voice that could sell anything to anyone. I stepped into the doorway and watched him. He turned, still smiling, until he saw my face. "What's up?" he asked casually. "Just checking my emails?" I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the counter and unplugged the Wi-Fi router. His grin faltered. "Hey, what's that for?" I said nothing, just held up my phone, the bank's confirmation screen still glowing. "We need to talk," I said. He frowned, tilting his head. "If this is about that card thing I told you, it was just snacks. Chill out." The words came out so easily, as if $12,000 could vanish without consequence. I laid the printed statements on the counter between us, each line a wound he'd left behind. Headphones, flights, a gaming laptop, I said quietly. "You didn't just buy snacks, Travis. You used me." His expression hardened, the charm slipping. "You're being dramatic. I was going to pay you back. You act like I'm some criminal." My voice was steady now. "You are," I said. The silence stretched between us. He tried to laugh, but it came out strained. "You think I'd steal from my own sister?" I didn't answer. The evidence spoke for itself. His hand twitched toward the papers as if to crumple them, but he stopped halfway, realizing he had nowhere to go with the lie. From behind the doorframe, I could see Liam's backpack hanging on the hook, his name stitched in bright thread. That single sight pulled me back to the reason I couldn't back down anymore. Travis turned away, muttering something under his breath, but I caught it. "You've always been the martyr." I didn't correct him. I just stepped closer to the counter, gathered the papers, and said, "You need to leave the kitchen." My voice came out calm, maybe too calm, but it made him pause. I knew then that this confrontation wasn't the end of it. My father would call, Travis would twist the story, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of the fallout. That night after Liam was asleep, I changed every password, froze every account, and shut off every access point tied to my name. My hands moved on their own, deliberate and sure. When it was done, I sat by the window, watching the reflection of the streetlights ripple on the lake. I thought of the years I'd spent patching things up, of the meals, missed the hours borrowed from sleep, the small kindnesses that had turned into debts, and I realized how much peace costs when you keep buying it with silence. In the distance, a car door slammed. Travis's voice echoed faintly as he stepped outside to take a call. I closed the curtain. The next sound would come in the morning, his anger, his excuses, maybe even my father's disappointment. But right then, I didn't care. For the first time in a long while, I was ready to hear whatever came next. The next morning, I woke to the sound of drawers slamming in the guest room. A low rumble followed, then silence. I poured coffee and waited. The smell drifted through the kitchen, but it didn't bring comfort like it used to. When Travis appeared in the doorway, his eyes were sharp, his tone defensive. "You froze my accounts," he said flatly. "My debit card got declined at the gas station. I didn't look up right away. Then you understand what $12,000 feels like, I answered quietly. He scoffed and leaned against the counter. You're really doing this over money? His voice cracked on the word money like it was too small for what he'd taken. You act like I ruined your life. I turned to face him. You didn't ruin my life, Travis. You stole from it. The air between us tightened brittle and still. He started pacing, muttering about how I always made him out to be the bad guy. By the time I left for work that afternoon, the house felt tense enough to hum. Liam came downstairs rubbing sleep from his eyes, asking if everything was okay. I forced a smile and told him we'd talk later. I didn't want to drag him into it, not yet. That evening my father called. His number flashed across the screen like a warning I didn't want to read. Marissa. He started his voice calm and practiced. Travis says you froze his cards. What's going on over there? I explained what the bank had confirmed the proof sitting in front of me, but he cut in before I could finish. He's not a criminal, he said firmly. He just made a mistake. You've always been the responsible one. You can fix this. I stared at the window, watching the reflection of the lake ripple in the distance. Dad, he planned this, I said softly. He rerouted my notifications and hid every transaction. This wasn't an accident. There was a pause, the kind that stretches between generations. He's your brother, he said finally, as if that one fact erased everything else. I didn't respond. My silence must have sounded like defiance because his tone hardened. You've got to stop making this a war, he added. You can't just give up on family. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table long after the house went dark. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space Travis had once filled with his late-night chatter. I thought about how many times I'd stepped into this same role, cleaning up, explaining, smoothing things over. It wasn't anger that kept me awake. It was the ache of recognition. This pattern had roots. It was older than both of us. Growing up, Dad used to say that Travis just needed time to find himself while I knew how to handle things. At 12, that meant babysitting, paying attention, fixing mistakes before they reached him. At 36, it meant absorbing damage so the family wouldn't have to face it. The next day, I came home from a client meeting to find Liam doing homework on the couch. His notebooks were stacked neatly beside him, but his eyes darted toward the guest room every few minutes. Is Uncle Travis leaving? He asked finally. I sat beside him and brushed his hair back. Maybe for a little while, I said. Why? He shrugged. It's quieter when he's not here. That small sentence landed heavier than any argument I'd had with my brother. I realized my son had been carrying the same tension, just smaller, quieter, tucked behind polite smiles and early bedtimes. I promised myself he wouldn't have to carry it much longer. Later that night, I heard Travis on the phone in the kitchen, his voice low but agitated. She's making me look like a thief, he said. Dad, you don't get it. She's obsessed with control. I stopped at the top of the stairs, his words hitting harder than they should have. He was already twisting the story, framing it, so I was the villain, the cold one, the ungrateful sister who refused to forgive. I stayed quiet, listening. My father's muffled voice came through the speaker, calm and sympathetic, the same tone he'd used on me 100 times. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught enough to understand. He wanted me to let it go, again. The next morning, I packed a small box with Travis's mail, a pair of his shoes, and the spare keys he'd left on the counter. I set it by his door. When he came downstairs, he looked at it, then at me. So that's how it is, he asked. You're kicking me out. I didn't answer right away. You've been here 8 months, Travis. You said it'd be a few weeks. He laughed once, short and humorless. You think you're better than me because you've got a job and a kid? I think I'm done being taken advantage of, I said. He stared at me for a long moment, like he didn't recognize me anymore. Then he grabbed his jacket and walked out the screen door, snapping shut behind him. That evening, Dad showed up unannounced. The sun had already set, and the porch light threw long shadows across the steps. He didn't knock. He just stood there, his expression tired, but certain. Marissa, he said you can't just throw him out. He's got nowhere to go. He'll figure it out, I said quietly. He's done it before. Dad shook his head. You don't understand how hard things have been for him. You've always had it together. You can't expect him to be like you. The words scraped something raw inside me. I don't expect him to be like me, I said. I expect him not to steal from me. he sighed, rubbing his forehead. You're being cold. He's family. We don't turn our backs on family. I stepped back into the doorway, holding the edge of the frame like an anchor. I'm not turning my back, I said. I'm finally facing what's been in front of me all along. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned, muttering that I'd regret this one day. His car engine faded down the road, leaving the sound of crickets and the low hum of the lake behind. Inside, the house was still. Liam was asleep. His bedroom door cracked open, a nightlight casting soft shapes on the wall. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop again. The fraud report had updates pending transactions marked under investigation. I traced each line with my finger like counting scars. I didn't know how much I'd get back or what would happen with Travis next. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to pretending everything was fine. Before I turned off the light, I walked down the hall and peeked into Liam's room. His shoulders rose and fell with each breath, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen for months. I closed the door halfway, leaving just enough space for the light to spill through. When I finally lay down, I listened to the wind pushing softly against the window. The house felt empty, but it wasn't lonely. It was waiting for whatever came next, for the shift that had already begun, for the kind of peace that comes only after everything breaks. And in that quiet, I knew tomorrow wouldn't bring apologies or easy fixes. It would bring decisions, and I was ready to make them. The days after that argument passed in fragments: emails from the bank, calls from clients, the dull hum of the refrigerator at night. I kept the box of Travis's things by the door untouched, waiting for him to come back for them. But instead of showing up, he sent text messages, short ones. You overreacted. I'll pay you back. Dad thinks you're being cruel. I didn't reply. Each one felt like another way to pull me into the same old loop. That Thursday morning, the sun came in gray through the kitchen blinds. I poured coffee, opened my laptop, and checked my bank alerts. New charges hadn't appeared, but there was something else, a notification I'd never seen before. A secondary user had been deactivated. I froze. When I called the bank's fraud department, the representative confirmed what I already suspected. Someone had added a secondary login under my name, routed notifications to another number, and made purchases through it. Do you have a record of the number attached to that profile? I asked. The rep read it out. It was Travis's phone. The confirmation left a hollow ringing in my ears. He hadn't stumbled into this by accident, he'd planned it. I asked the bank to send me a copy of every transaction log. They promised to forward it within the hour. When the email came, I opened it on the kitchen table, my hands trembling. Every timestamp told a story. A $2,000 golf set, bought at 2 a.m. A subscription for an expensive streaming service right after that. The last charge for a designer watch had gone through just before dawn. He'd been awake all night spending the money I'd worked years to save. I printed the pages, spread them across the table, and stared at the list until the ink blurred. Then I reached for my phone and called my father. He answered on the second ring. Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice even. The bank confirmed everything. Travis set up an alternate profile and turned off my alerts. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. Marissa, you're letting this get out of hand. He's ashamed enough already. You don't need to drag it through the mud. I gripped the phone tighter. Ashamed. He stole from me, Dad. He's your brother, he said simply. He's made mistakes, but he's not a bad person. Don't call it stealing. I stared at the papers on the table, at the proof lined up in black and white. It is stealing, I said softly, but my father didn't respond. He just repeated the same line I'd heard since childhood, that family was supposed to forgive. After we hung up, the house felt too still. I could hear Liam moving around upstairs, the sound of his footsteps soft against the old wood floor. I didn't want him to feel the tension that had taken root here. I'd already let it change enough. That afternoon, while Travis was out, I went into his room. The curtains were drawn, the air thick with the smell of old takeout and laundry detergent. His clothes were scattered across the floor, and his duffel bag sat half open near the bed. On his desk, his phone was charging. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I picked it up. The banking app was still open, logged in under the secondary profile. Scrolling through, I found what I expected: receipts, confirmations, and even messages from the vendors. There was one email chain with his name and mine listed together, him pretending to be me to approve a purchase. I took screenshots of everything. The evidence felt heavy in my hands but necessary. When he came home that evening, the first thing he noticed was the papers spread across the kitchen table. His face went pale, then red. "You went through my stuff," he snapped. "I went through my account," I said, "the one you stole from." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're unbelievable. I was going to pay you back. You're making me look like a criminal in front of Dad." I pointed to the printouts. "You used a VPN. You turned off my alerts. You created a whole fake profile. That's not borrowing, Travis. That's deception." He threw up his hands. "Fine, I messed up. You think this is easy? You've always had it together. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything." I shook my head. "You didn't lose everything. You took everything." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then his voice dropped lower. "You're heartless. You know that Mom would have never treated me like this." The mention of our mother gone for nearly a decade landed between us like a blow. He knew what he was doing, pulling at the one thread he thought would unravel me. But it didn't. Not this time. "Mom taught us both to do better than this," I said quietly. "You're the one who forgot." He didn't answer. He just grabbed his jacket and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. That night I called Dana. She listened while I told her everything: the fake profile, the confrontation, the call with Dad. Her voice came steady through the phone. "Marissa, you can't keep giving him chances," she said. "You've done more than enough. It's time to protect yourself." "I already froze the accounts," I said, "but the bank's still reviewing the fraud claims." "Then start with what you can control," she said. "Change every password. Get your credit checked. And if you need to talk to a lawyer—" I rubbed my temple, exhaustion sinking deep. "It's just hard," I said. "He's still my brother." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Being family doesn't mean you let someone burn your house down." Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. I spent the next hour changing every password, locking down every account tied to my name. Each click felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost: security control, even self-respect. By the time I finished, the house was silent. I walked through the hall, closing the doors one by one. When I reached Liam's room, I paused. He was asleep, one arm hanging off the bed, his notebook scattered on the floor. I tucked the blanket around him and whispered goodnight. Downstairs, the table was still covered with papers. I gathered them into a folder and set it beside my laptop. Outside, the lake reflected a pale moon rippling under the wind. The quiet felt different now, not heavy, just waiting. I knew Travis would come back. He always did. He'd have excuses, maybe tears, maybe another plea for forgiveness. And I also knew my father would call again, insisting I give in. But this time, something in me had shifted. The next morning, the phone rang before dawn. I let it buzz twice before answering. It was the bank confirming that the fraud affidavit had been processed. "We've locked the secondary user and escalated the case," the woman said. "You should start seeing partial reversals soon." When I hung up, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. The sound of the wind outside mixed with the low hum of the refrigerator. The house still carried the remnants of tension, but underneath it there was something new. Quiet, determination. I looked toward the guest room door, half-open, light spilling across the floor. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure. The pattern had broken. And even if my father couldn't see it, I finally could. The sun began to rise soft and gold through the blinds, as if the house itself was ready for whatever came after this. When the first reversal from the bank came through, the relief hit me like a small breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. $6,500 returned to my account. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to keep us afloat for now. I sat at my desk watching the balance update my hands steady for the first time in weeks. The statement felt like proof that I wasn't powerless anymore. But with the relief came clarity, and I knew what I needed to do next. That evening, I called Travis into the living room. My father was there too, sipping coffee like nothing had changed, the same old calm that always made me question my own resolve. Liam was at a friend's house, and the quiet around us felt heavy with what was about to happen. "Travis," I said, "you have 10 days to move out." The words came out low, measured. He froze, then gave a short laugh as if I'd made a bad joke. "You're serious?" he asked. "You're really throwing me out?" "I'm giving you time," I said. 10 days to find somewhere else. You've had 8 months of my help, and this—" I gestured toward the paperwork still spread across the table. "This is how you repaid it." His voice rose quickly. "You're unbelievable. After everything I've been through, this is how you treat me. You're supposed to be my sister, not my enemy." My father set down his cup. "Marissa, come on," he said gently. "He made a mistake. You can't just put him out. He's got nowhere to go." I looked at my father, the same man who used to tell me that responsibility meant doing the right thing, not the easy one. "He had a place here, Dad," I said. "He had food, a roof, and a second chance. He used all of it to steal from me." Travis stepped closer, his tone sharp now. "You act like I killed someone. I told you I'd pay you back. You just can't let go of anything. You always have to be in control. You spent my son's college savings," I said quietly. "You hid it like it didn't matter. I'm done pretending this is normal." He slammed his hand on the coffee table. "You're so selfish. You've got money, you've got the kid, you've got everything. You can't spare a little help." The words landed like they always had, carefully chosen to guilt me into backing down. But this time I didn't move. "I have what I earned," I said, "and you have 10 days. No discussion." My father stood, his expression tight. "You're tearing this family apart," he said. "This isn't what your mother would have wanted." That old refrain again. The invisible standard I was always held to. I met his eyes and kept my voice steady. "Mom wanted peace, Dad. Not chaos. Not this." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Travis grabbed his jacket and stormed out the front door, slamming so hard it rattled the windows. My father followed slowly, shaking his head. "You'll regret this," he muttered before he left. When the house was finally still, I sank onto the couch. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. The boundaries were set. For the first time in years, I'd chosen myself and my son over keeping the peace. The next few days passed like a strange in-between. I cooked, checked the mailbox for updates from the bank. The fraud department confirmed that several transactions were being reversed with more pending investigation. It was progress, but it didn't erase the damage. Liam noticed the change before I said a word. "Mom," he asked one morning, "is Uncle Travis mad at us?" I paused, spreading butter on toast that neither of us really wanted. "He's mad at me," I said softly, "but that's okay. Sometimes people get mad when you tell them no." He nodded like he understood, though he shouldn't have to at his age. That weekend I met Dana for coffee at a small shop downtown. She listened as I told her about the confrontation, her expression calm but firm. "You did the right thing," she said. "You drew a line, now you have to keep it." "I just hate how Dad sees it," I admitted. "He still thinks I'm punishing Travis." Dana stirred her coffee, then looked up at me. "Your dad's tied to who Travis used to be, not who he is now. You can't fix that for him." Her tone wasn't harsh, just matter of fact. "You can only protect what's yours." When I got home, I found Travis sitting on the front steps smoking a cigarette he hadn't paid for. He didn't look up as I walked past him. "You really meant it, huh?" he said finally. 10 days. "Yes," I said. "You've got until next Friday." He flicked the cigarette away and stood. "Don't worry, I won't stay a minute longer than I have to." He didn't look angry anymore, just tired. For a second, I saw the brother I used to know, the one who made me laugh at county fairs and promised he'd get his act together someday. Then he turned away, and that version of him was gone again. The following morning, the house felt lighter. He still slept in late, still left dishes in the sink, but I didn't mind the small messes. I knew they were temporary. Liam's shoulders seemed to ease a little too. He started spending more time at the dining table again, his notebook spread wide as he worked on his coding projects. The sound of his pencil scratching the page filled the quiet that Travis used to dominate. By midweek, Travis had packed half his things. He didn't talk much, just moved around the house like a ghost collecting what he'd left behind. The day before his deadline, he left a note on the kitchen counter in his messy handwriting. "I'm sorry for the trouble. I'll figure things out. Don't hate me." There was no mention of the money, no promise to repay it. Just a vague apology that landed between us like unfinished business. He was gone by morning. His room stood empty, the faint smell of his cologne still lingering in the air. Liam walked in behind me, looked around, and asked, "Is he coming back?" I shook my head. "Not for a while." He nodded, then said, "It's quieter now." That night, I sat at my desk reviewing a new email from the bank. Another reversal had gone through $3,000 this time. Slowly, the damage was being undone. The numbers didn't fix the betrayal, but they helped. Outside, the moonlight stretched across the lake, pale and still. I thought about the last few weeks, about how standing up for myself had felt like tearing something open. But underneath the ache was something steady, almost peaceful. The house was ours again, and so was the silence. My father didn't call that weekend, though I saw his name flash once on my screen. I let it ring. I wasn't ready to hear the same speech again. Not now. When Sunday came, I took Liam to the park by the lake. The leaves were starting to turn the air cool and clean. He laughed when the wind lifted his hair, a sound that felt like music after months of tension. As we sat on the bench watching the water, he said, "Mom, can we go to the Science Museum next weekend?" I smiled and nodded. "Yeah, I think we can do that." For the first time in months, I could say yes without calculating what it would cost. The peace we'd fought for was fragile, but it was ours. And as the sun dropped behind the water, I knew this wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning of the life we were finally ready to build. A week passed, and the house grew quieter with each day. Travis's room sat empty now, the blinds half open, the light landing on bare walls where his posters once hung. The emptiness wasn't sad, it was steady, like the pause after a storm finally breaks. Liam had started humming again while he worked on his projects, and that sound filled the silence better than any conversation. The bank emailed me that Friday morning. More of the disputed charges had cleared, bringing my total recovered to just over $9,000. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to rebuild. I sat there staring at the confirmation message, the sunlight warming my hands through the kitchen window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel weighed down by uncertainty. That same afternoon, my father called. His voice sounded heavier than usual, the sharpness replaced by something slower, almost weary. "Marissa," he said, "I heard Travis left. You could have told me. I thought he might have told you himself," I said. "He just said things got tense," my father replied. "He's trying to get settled somewhere new. You should have given him more time." I stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "He had 8 months, Dad." My father sighed. "You've always been so strong, but sometimes that strength turns cold. He's your brother. He's lost right now." "I know he's lost," I said softly. "But he has to find his own way." There was silence on the line, the kind that stretches until someone gives in. This time it wasn't me. He ended the call with a quiet, "Take care of yourself," and that was the last I heard from him for a while. The days after that call blurred into a rhythm I hadn't realized. I missed work errands, dinners with Liam that didn't feel tense. I found him one evening at the dining table surrounded by circuit boards and wires, his laptop open to a small coding project. "What are you building?" I asked. He looked up, smiling. "A motion sensor. It'll make the porch light turn on when someone walks by." I laughed softly. "So I'll never trip on the steps again. That's the idea," he said, grinning. His easy confidence reminded me that stability wasn't just money in the bank. It was a feeling that spread through a home when things were finally right. A few days later, I got an envelope from the bank confirming the final reversal. $11,000 restored to my account. I sat at my desk reading the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in my drawer. The money covered the mortgage, Liam's school fees, and a bit more to rebuild our savings. But the real weight that lifted wasn't financial. It was the quiet knowledge that I'd handled it myself. That evening, I walked down to the lake. The water reflected streaks of orange and gold rippling softly under the breeze. I could still remember the night I'd let Travis move in, how cold that winter wind had been, how certain I'd been that helping him was the right thing. I'd opened my door out of love, and it had cost me peace. Now, standing there in the warmth of spring, I felt something closer to forgiveness, not for what he'd done, but for the part of me that had believed I could save him. The following week, Dana came over with takeout and 2 cups of coffee. She dropped her purse on the counter and smiled. "You look better," she said. I feel better, I admitted. She raised an eyebrow. No more chaos. Not for now, I said, handing her a fork. The house finally feels like ours again. We ate in the kitchen, talking about work and small things. Then she leaned back, watching me. You know, she said you could use some time off. Maybe take Liam on a trip. Something just for you two. I've thought about it, I said. He's been wanting to go to the Science Museum in Cleveland. Then go, she said. You've spent enough time fixing everyone else's mess. Now fix your joy. Her words made me smile. It was strange how something so simple could sound like a plan. Later that night, after she left, I found Liam at his desk sketching out blueprints for his next project. How would you feel about a weekend in Cleveland? I asked. He looked up, eyes wide. Really? Can we go to the museum? That's the plan, I said. You pick the exhibits. He grinned, and the way he jumped up to hug me made the whole decision worth it. A few days before the trip, I stopped by the grocery store after work. As I was loading the bags into my car, I saw a familiar figure across the parking lot, Travis. He was thinner, his clothes rumpled, his hair unkempt. For a second, I thought about pretending I hadn't seen him, but he spotted me first. He walked over, hands shoved in his pockets. Hey, he said, his voice low. Didn't expect to run into you. I nodded. Hi, Travis. He kicked at the gravel near his feet. I've been meaning to call. Just didn't know what to say. I got the note, I said. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I meant what I wrote. I'm sorry for everything. There was no anger left in his voice, just exhaustion. He told me he'd been staying in a small apartment in Columbus, picking up shifts at a warehouse. It wasn't much, he said, but it was a start. I believed him. I'm glad you're figuring things out, I said. He looked at me, eyes tired, but clearer than before. You don't hate me. I shook my head. No, but I can't go back to how things were. He nodded as if he'd expected that. Fair enough. He gave a small wave, then turned to walk away. Watching him go, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just peace. Some lessons don't need to be taught twice. That weekend, Liam and I drove to Cleveland. The highway stretched ahead in long, quiet miles, and the air was full of that in-between feeling that comes after a hard chapter ends. At the museum, Liam moved from one exhibit to the next, his excitement contagious. He showed me everything: planets, circuits, light experiments, and I realized how long it had been since I'd seen him this happy. On the drive home, he fell asleep in the back seat, his head resting against his backpack. The road rolled on, lined with fields and the soft hum of early summer. I glanced at him in the mirror and felt the kind of calm that doesn't shout, it just settles in. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked different somehow. Not bigger, not brighter, just ours again. Inside the living room smelled faintly of the lavender candle I'd lit earlier, the curtains swaying gently in the evening breeze. I set my keys on the counter, the same counter where I'd once spread out stacks of bank papers, and realized how far we'd come from that moment. The fight, the fear, the silence. It was all behind us now, part of the story, but not the whole of it. I didn't know if Travis would ever truly change, or if my father would ever see things from my side. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to wait for either of them. As I turned off the lights, I caught a glimpse of the lake through the window. The water was still reflecting the moon like glass. It felt like a promise, the kind that doesn't need words, only the quiet strength to keep moving forward. And in that stillness, I knew the next part of our lives had already begun. 2 weeks passed after that trip to Cleveland, and life found its rhythm again. Liam was back in school, his notebook stacked neatly on the kitchen counter each morning before I drove him to the bus stop. I'd started running the numbers for new clients, the steady rhythm of work filling the hours that had once been taken up by worry. The house stayed clean, quiet, predictable, things I hadn't realized I'd missed. One afternoon, an email from the bank appeared in my inbox. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another notice about the reversal process, but when I opened it, I saw the words, "Final Report of Investigation." My hand tightened around the mouse. The report confirmed that the fraud case had officially closed, and the bank had traced all unauthorized purchases back to a single user, Travis's digital profile. The note at the bottom stated that his attempt to open new accounts using my information had been flagged and denied. I exhaled slowly, reading the final line twice. The case was complete. There would be no further losses. That evening I printed the report and slipped it into a folder, locking it in my desk drawer. It wasn't about revenge, it was about having proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. The peace that followed wasn't loud. It was the kind that sits in the corners of your home and stays put. Around dinner, my father's name appeared on my phone screen. I hesitated before answering. "Hey, Dad," I said quietly. "Marissa." He started his tone softer than usual. "I've been meaning to call. I heard from Travis's friend that he's been struggling, lost his job again. He said the warehouse cut back on shifts." I closed my eyes for a moment, gripping the counter edge. "I hope he finds something stable," I said. There was a pause before my father spoke again. He might need some help. I took a breath, the words careful as they left me. "Dad, I can't fix this for him." "I'm not saying fix it," he said. "Just don't close the door forever. He's still your brother." I looked out the window at the lake, calm under the fading light. "I haven't locked the door," I said. "But he has to knock first." My father didn't reply for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, quieter, heavier. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe it's time he learned that." After the call ended, I stood there in the stillness, realizing how different that conversation felt from the ones before. There was no pleading this time, no argument, just a kind of quiet acknowledgement that I'd been right to stand my ground. That weekend, Dana stopped by with a basket of groceries and her usual straightforward wisdom. She set the basket on the counter and raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone who finally slept a full night," she said. "I might have," I admitted with a smile. "The case is closed. It's over." Her grin widened. "That's huge, Marissa. You did it." We poured coffee and sat at the table where so many tense conversations had taken place over the past year. "It doesn't feel like winning," I said, tracing the rim of my cup. "Just finally being able to breathe. Sometimes that's what justice feels like," she said. Not loud, just quiet and fair. Later that day, while organizing the last of my files, I noticed a letter in the mailbox, handwritten, addressed in Travis's messy scrawl. My stomach twisted as I held it. I took it inside, sat on the couch, and opened it slowly. He'd written that he'd started working again part-time at a car wash this time and was trying to stay sober. He said he knew he'd gone too far, that losing me and Liam had forced him to face what he'd become. The letter ended with 6 simple words. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." I read it twice before folding it back into the envelope. I didn't cry, but my chest ached with something close to relief. It wasn't an apology that erased anything, but it was an acknowledgement that mattered. I placed the letter beside the folder with the bank report, 2 sides of the same truth. That night, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Liam came into the kitchen holding a small stack of his drawings. "Can we hang these in the hallway?" he asked. The papers were filled with sketches of robot circuits, and one labeled, "My Project Motion Light System." "Of course," I said. Together we taped them along the hallway wall. When we stepped back, the line of bright papers made the house feel alive again. He smiled proudly, then looked up at me. "Mom, we're okay now, right?" I brushed his hair aside and nodded. "We're better than okay." After he went to bed, I sat in the living room, the lamp casting soft light over the framed photos on the shelf. There was one of Travis and me as kids standing in the yard holding sparklers. I hadn't noticed it in months. For a moment, I thought about putting it away, but instead, I left it there. Some things didn't need to be erased to lose their power. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message was short. "Heard the case is done. I'm glad you got your money back." It was from Travis. I stared at it for a while, then typed back, "I hope you're doing better." That was all. It didn't need more. The next morning, as I left for work, the world felt lighter somehow. The air was crisp, the lake mirrored the early sun, and the wind carried that clean smell that comes after months of rain. I realized I hadn't felt afraid in weeks, not of the phone ringing, not of what the next bill might bring, not of another betrayal waiting around the corner. Justice hadn't come in the way I expected. There were no courts, no public reckonings. But the truth had been seen acknowledged and corrected. Travis would face his own consequences, the ones life has a way of delivering quietly and consistently. I didn't need to witness them. It was enough to know that I'd drawn a line and stood by it. That evening, Liam and I sat by the lake with sandwiches from the corner deli. The sky turned amber, the water shimmering with the last bit of sunlight. He leaned his head against my shoulder and said, "I like it when it's just us." I smiled, looking out over the water. "Me too, buddy. Me too." The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of gold across the rippling surface. For a long time, we didn't speak. We didn't have to. Everything that needed saying had already been said in the quiet choices we'd made. And as the evening deepened around us, I felt that peace again, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but settles into your life when you finally stop fighting to be understood. It was the peace of knowing that what's fair doesn't always need to be forced. Sometimes it just unfolds slow and steady, like the sunset over the lake. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring for Travis, or for my father, but I knew what it would bring for us: normalcy, safety, maybe even joy. The kind you build yourself one steady day at a time. As the sky faded into twilight, Liam pointed to the first star that appeared. "Make a wish," he whispered. I closed my eyes and did not for something new, but for what we already had: peace, truth, and a home that finally felt whole again. The following weeks unfolded quietly, as if the whole world had slowed its pace to match mine. The air around Willow Ridge carried that soft shift of early summer, the scent of rain, the hum of lawnmowers, the easy rhythm of normal life returning. I found comfort in the ordinary again. Bills got paid on time, my work came steadily, and evenings were spent cooking with Liam or reading while the lake breeze moved through the curtains. One morning, as I sorted through mail at the kitchen counter, I found a small envelope with my father's handwriting. Inside was a short note. "Marissa, I've been thinking about everything. You were right to stand firm. I didn't see the full picture before, but I do now. I'm proud of you. Love, Dad." I stood there for a long moment reading those lines again. The words were simple, but they carried something I'd been waiting to hear for years: acknowledgement, not just apology. Later that day I called him. When he answered, his voice carried a hesitation I'd never heard before. "I didn't expect you to call," he said. "I got your note," I told him. "Thank you." He cleared his throat. "I should have listened sooner. I thought I was protecting the family, but all I did was excuse the wrong things." There wasn't bitterness in his tone, only honesty. We talked for nearly an hour about Liam, about work, about Travis finding part-time jobs here and there. When the call ended, I felt lighter. Some wounds don't heal through arguments. They mend quietly when the truth finally settles in. That weekend, Liam and I worked in the small garden behind our house. The soil was warm under our hands, the kind that crumbles easily when you dig into it. He planted tomato seeds while I set up the watering can. "Do you think they'll grow fast?" he asked. "They'll grow when they're ready," I said, smiling. "You just have to take care of them every day." He nodded seriously, the way kids do when they're learning something bigger than it sounds. Watching him there focused hopeful. I realized how much had changed since those tense months. The weight that had hung over our home was gone. What replaced it was quiet and real. That night after dinner, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and looked out over the lake. The sky was streaked with pink and silver, and for the first time I wasn't thinking about what had been taken from me. I was thinking about what had stayed my son my peace, and the part of myself I'd almost lost trying to keep everyone else comfortable. A message came through on my phone, breaking the silence. It was from Travis. "Started a new job detailing cars. It's not much, but it's honest. Thanks for not giving up on me even when I didn't deserve it." I didn't respond right away. I read it twice, then set the phone aside. Some things didn't need immediate answers. It was enough to know he was trying, maybe for the first time, without leaning on someone else to carry him. When I went back inside, the house felt full in a way it hadn't for years, not with noise, but with calm. Liam's laughter floated from the living room where he was video calling Dana's son about their next school project. The two of them planned to build a model rocket, and he'd already cleared space on the table for it. I smiled, thinking how far that same table had come, from piles of bills and tension to something that finally felt like a home again. Before bed, I checked my bank account one last time out of habit. The balance was stable, the numbers steady. No surprises, no losses, just what was mine, staying where it belonged. I closed the laptop and turned off the light. Lying in bed, I thought about everything we'd weathered: the betrayal, the guilt, the long silence that followed. It struck me that justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's as quiet as a woman taking back her own peace, as steady as the decision to stop apologizing for drawing a boundary. I'd learned that protecting yourself doesn't make you cold, it makes you whole. And love, when it's real, survives even when you stop letting it excuse the wrong things. My father's change of heart. Travis's small steps toward responsibility, Liam's laughter, all of it proved that healing can exist right alongside distance. The house grew still around me, and I let the quiet settle in. Through the open window, I could hear the gentle sound of the lake, steady and unhurried. It reminded me that peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves, soft, deliberate, and certain. By the time I drifted to sleep, I wasn't thinking about loss anymore. I was thinking about growth, about how even the hardest seasons make room for something stronger to take root. So if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, let my story remind you, peace built on silence will never last. The real kind begins when you start protecting your own heart. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who's still learning how to stand their ground. And wherever you are, I hope you find the kind of peace that finally stays.